Testing. What's that? Absolutely. Testing, testing. Oh, testing, testing. Good.
You're going to go right there. Chief, you're good. Afternoon, everyone. This is our weekly update. We were interrupted last week, but we are back on schedule. Have a lot to talk about, certainly related to COVID, but also the ongoing protests here in the city of Syracuse and throughout the country. I do want to acknowledge as well that we did have a really violent night in the city of Syracuse last night. We had 4 people shot, and we did lose one of our neighbors. We had a homicide last night, and my prayers are with the families of all of the victims. It's hard to imagine with a global pandemic and very difficult protests and conversations around systemic racism that it's easy to forget that we still have everything else going on in our community and many of the problems that have been plaguing us for far too long. So again, very sorry to those families. Want to acknowledge we have our Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens here with us. Chief Buckner is here with us, and we have another guest who you'll be hearing from shortly, Dr. Stephen Thomas, who many of you have gotten to know from SUNY Upstate Medical University. I want to thank the Common Council for the use of the chambers, and thank you all for joining me. Just a quick run through of the agenda. We're going to talk about the protests, one of which we have going on right outside of our doors right now. We'll give a status report, talk about planning heading into the weekend, and talk about the ongoing dialogue that's taking place both at the protests and between them on really important issues. Again, we'll give an update on COVID-19, talk about safety, and I'll give a few operational updates for the City of Syracuse, including, especially as they relate to our Parks Department. And then we will, again, talk about the ongoing fiscal crisis that the City of Syracuse is facing and the importance of action from Congress in Washington. So to start out on the protests, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Buckner to give a quick report, update on planning, and then we'll go from there. Chief.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, I'd like to touch on the fact that the mayor did discuss that there was a pretty significant night in our city as it relates to violence. 4 individuals were shot. 1 resulted in a homicide. 1 victim is in critical condition. 2 are considered to be non-life threatening. I will also update you that in the past couple of hours or so, we've also made an arrest for the homicide of Zachary Holloway that occurred here in recent history. I don't remember the exact date, but the shootings that we're referencing were on Genesee, Craddock, and Salina. Going into the protest information, we have certainly been very, very pleased and appreciative of the fact that the vast majority of our protests have been peaceful and lawful. You will also notice that during these protests, that in our attempts to make sure that everyone has the time and space, opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights, we provided traffic support for the events when they have gone mobile. Our goal is to ensure that we have no criminal or destructive behavior. If that occurs, we will be prepared to strategically to respond to that. And then we all have a duty to protect the city of Syracuse. Friday being today, there are multiple events that are planned for today. We expect the same of what we've seen over the past few days. The individuals will show up to a central meeting point. They walked for several miles, which has been quite impressive, the distance to which that they have covered, and also shows the commitment of the people to want something done. Saturday being kind of probably the highlight of our weekend because of the mere size of it. We're expected to have a couple of thousand participants that will show up this weekend. There are 3 primary locations of which that are of concern and that we will be focused. That is the Public Safety Building, City Hall, and then multiple locations throughout the county and city. There will certainly be traffic restrictions in and around the two locations being PSB and City Hall. So we ask that the public to work with us on that and also keep up with our media updates as we put out information for the public on that. The time is set to begin at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. None of the protests have started or ended on time, so we expect to go well into the night tomorrow, as we've done with all of our protests. Our detail, we will start at approximately 10 a.m. It is, as a part of our contingency, all of SPD, when I say all of SPD, all hands on deck for our police department, the state, the county sheriff, our towns and villages, county probation, 911 communications, emergency management, medical facilities, specifically with AMR, and also, lastly, the community will serve as partners this weekend to ensure that we have a peaceful weekend, hopefully without incident, but again, we all have a responsibility for that. To date, I believe we're still at 6 arrests that have occurred, so we've had minimal arrests during these events, and we have 2 officers that have been injured, one with a head injury, concussion, and then the other one was had to get a few stitches in his leg. I'd also like to, at this time, discuss an incident that occurred with one of our local photographers that has received a lot of media attention, as it should have, because it was a critical incident that occurred. The incident occurred on Saturday, May the 30th, during the night, during the climax moment of this protest history that we have here in Syracuse. It was the actual time when the public safety building was under attack and several windows were broken out of the Justice Hall next door and also PSB. We were notified of the incident in question on June the 1st, sometime that morning, accompanied with a 3-second video. The mayor and I immediately ordered an investigation into the incident. On June the 3rd, at approximately 4:50 p.m., I called Mr. Nett. Mr. Nett is the photographer for Syracuse.com, and personally apologized to him for being knocked to the ground. It was not our intention to knock him to the ground or prevent him from doing a very important job. I also have no reason to believe that Mr. Nett intentionally did anything to impact PD from doing their job. As it stands, the commander of the public order unit will complete an investigation. He's been preoccupied, as you probably could imagine, with the ongoing events that we have going on, but it is his responsibility to complete that after action report and the use of force. We need to continue our review of the evidence, which is the 3-second video and any other footage that may be available. We will interview all parties that were involved in the incident, and specifically including the officer involved and Mr. Nett, before the completion of the investigation. And then at its conclusion, at the appropriate time, I will make a decision. In closing, to members of the media, I would like to apologize to Mr. Nett and to anyone who was offended by the unfortunate events that occurred on Saturday night. We view the media as a partner, and will continue to work with them to illuminate the things that are important to our community. We plan to conduct training with our officers in the public order unit, and also our other members who are not members of that unit, as well as invite our media partners to some of our training to ensure that we work on specific things like working in a shared space during these very tense moments, and with the understanding that both jobs are equally important. SPD, lastly, there's some of you would possibly take issue with me apologizing for what many would describe as officers attempting to do their job. To you, I say this: an apology does not make us weak. It actually makes us stronger, and it also humanizes the person behind the badge. That is all I have in my notes for that, and we will take your questions. I'm sure that you will have at a later point.
Great, thanks, Chief. Just to follow up on that, I I too had an opportunity to talk to Mr. Nett and apologize for what happened. It was a very tense situation, and the public safety building was under attack. And I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback. The chief has a process in place, and we're going to follow that process. But again, I think regardless of the outcome of that process, an apology for what occurred while somebody was trying to do their job is appropriate. I also had a chance to speak with Syracuse.com as well as the head of the Syracuse Press Club to again express our apologies. I will say this has again been a very tense time for our community, also for our officers. I know Chief Buckner and I both feel that our officers have performed extremely well under very difficult circumstances, and have it's in large part thanks to their efforts in partnership with the community that we have seen largely safe protests throughout this week. So I want to acknowledge that, and again, once we get to the completion of that investigation, we will have more to say. As we move forward, both into the weekend and beyond, we are really focused on, again, getting at those root causes of why people are protesting, talking about systemic racism, talking about inequality, really difficult conversations that we need to be having, that as an administration and as a city we have been having, but we're certainly having more of them. The deputy mayor and I in particular have gone out of our way to engage with members of the community, including those that are out protesting and leading those protests. We've also had extensive conversations with the local clergy. It's important to keep in mind that people are hurting spiritually, and the clergy plays an important role in helping our community to heal. It's an ongoing process. I'm going to talk about some specific actions that we've taken here at the City of Syracuse and within the police department over the past couple of years to enhance the police department overall, but also to enhance accountability. Before I do that, I just want to give the deputy mayor an opportunity to share her thoughts on the conversations we've been having.
I'm so pleased to be able to echo what Chief Buckner said about our community expressing their First Amendment rights, and have been, for the most part, other than one incident we had the last Saturday, and that those were not protesters, peaceful, orderly, cooperative, and I'm really proud of that fact. As the mayor said, we were able to have some individual conversations with some of the protest leadership, and I myself, after the rally yesterday at Foreman Park, realized how much out of shape I am as I walked from Foreman Park all the way down Fayette through Genesee, through Geddes, until I had to find a friend who lived over there who gave me a ride back home. And the entire time, I was able to meet young people who wanted to express their concerns, but also learn about processes, learn about government systems, learn about procedures, learn about how they can be impactful, whether it be with the Common Council or the mayor's office or the chief's office or the state delegates. So we continue to encourage that. There is a new generation of leadership rising up in this community, and we want to keep them engaged, and not only informally, but in a more formal manner. And who knows, one or two or three or four of them could be the next elected officials on the local level, state level, federal level. So communication is the key. We're going to keep communicating with everyone, and move towards change that we all want to see.
Great, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just final thoughts on that. I did have a chance to march as well yesterday, which was a moving experience for me, and it was really great to get to know a lot of caring, passionate people in our city. I also, during the march, took a knee with the protesters, and had no conflict or concern in doing so. As I've tried to say, we don't have to pick sides here. There's just the right side. And having talked with many officers and many people in the community, everyone just wants to make sure that everyone is treated with dignity and respect. That's what we want. And again, having talked with a lot of officers, I know they feel the same way. I was proud to see 2 of our Syracuse police officers take a knee with the protesters as well. I think that showed real leadership, compassion, and empathy. And again, I know, having talked with a lot of other officers, that they all share our concerns. So again, this is something we have to get through together, and I think that we're doing that and expect to continue to. I want to just again give a quick recap of some of the specific actions we've taken over the past 2.5 years, especially over the past 1.5 years that Chief Buckner's been with us, to increase police accountability and enhance police community relations. Just some examples. The process to get this gentleman in this job, Deputy Mayor led a year-long effort that involved significant community engagement, public meetings. We gathered input. We did a nationwide search, and we found the right person for the job, and I feel very confident in that. But that process in and of itself gave us an opportunity to enhance community relations. Accreditation. It's important. Chief will always talk about 21st century police practices, looking at best practices and making sure they're reflected in our department. Before Chief Buckner came in, the Syracuse Police Department was already accredited by the State Department of Justice. That there are only 22% of the departments statewide that have the DCJS accreditation. And Chief came in as someone very much invested in the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, or CALEA, and has initiated the process for accreditation through CALEA. We talk about the importance of the police department reflecting the diversity of the community it serves. Chief's put an emphasis on focusing on diversity, both in terms of recruitment and on promotions through the department. We've instituted a lot of new policies, and again, it's a credit to Chief Buckner and his team for the amount of time and effort that they put into doing that. I think most importantly, given the discussions right now, we have a new use of force policy. So you're seeing conversations around the country, and a lot of people are hitting me up on social media saying, hey, you need to look at your use of force policy. I'm proud to say that we did do that without having to be called out on social media or encouraged by others. Chief Buckner came in, that was on the top of his list, and we did that. And again, we looked at best practices. We made sure that it emphasized things like valuing the sanctity of human life, of the importance of de-escalation, the importance of duty to intercede for other officers, banning chokeholds, with the exception of under a life-threatening condition. Those are all best practices. It doesn't mean that the use of force policy will not be reviewed. It's an iterative process, and we're always looking for ways to modernize and update. But again, I'm really proud of the process that we went through on that use of force policy. We also implemented a new officer and traffic violator policy, which includes express guidelines and a narrative script for how officers conduct traffic stops. We have a new body-worn camera policy that was critically important as we implement a department-wide body-worn camera system. We are still in the process of getting to 100% of our uniformed officers, but that is the goal, and we expect to get there. We have a new transgender policy to help officers ensure that they're engaging with transgender individuals in an appropriate manner. And we've also contracted with a company called Lexipol that conducts ongoing policy reviews. Will flag certain policies if there are laws that were passed that impact those policies. And again, it's all part of making sure that we're following best practices. Chief Buckner has had a focus on training, increasing the size and resources of the training staff. Something that we get asked a lot about, crisis intervention training. We're doing that, and Chief Buckner has set a goal of getting 20% of the police department trained in crisis intervention training, and we're very proud of that as well. A few other examples around community engagement. The chief separated the city into 3 districts. For each of those districts, we have a captain who's the primary point of contact for those areas, much more hands-on approach. The chief has also created citizen advisory committees for each of those districts. Last year, after a year of community meetings leading up to the appointment of Chief Buckner, we had another round of 5 public forums where we focused on a lot of different issues. We've continued dialogue circles with Interfaith Works, and we're looking to do more of that going forward with Interfaith and other partners. We conduct regular neighborhood walks, and the chief also changed the way in which the public information officer at the police department engages with the community. Finally, on the issue of officer discipline, we have Chief Buckner has overhauled the Office of Professional Standards. We engaged an outside consultant. We changed leadership, increased staffing, and physically moved the Office of Professional Standards out of the Public Safety Building and into our City Hall Commons building, which is also where the Citizens Review Board is located. The idea being we wanted to minimize any intimidation or concern that the public has in lodging those complaints with OPS. We discontinued the disciplinary procedure set forth in the collective bargaining agreement that involves arbitration. We have attempted to implement a newer, more transparent process governed by the New York second-class cities law, which involves open public hearings as a part of the disciplinary process that is currently being litigated. But that's something, again, I think a tangible example of where we've tried to improve the discipline process and make it more transparent. And again, I mentioned the Citizen Review Board. We've spent a lot of time engaging with the board and trying to find the right balance of cooperation and communication with the Citizen Review Board. So again, the point of me listing all that is to say that we have not just started paying attention to these issues. It's been a priority of mine ever since I walked through the doors of City Hall, priority of the deputy mayors, and certainly a priority of Chief Buckner, and we've accomplished a lot. It doesn't mean we're done, but we're making progress and expect to continue to make progress. Okay, it's hard sometimes to remember in the midst of everything going on that we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. I want to touch briefly on the current status of COVID-19 cases. As of June 4th, we've had 1,261 cases in the city of Syracuse. Of those, 601 are recoveries. So about 50% of those cases are recovered. That's certainly a good thing. And I'm sure we'll get an update from the county executive on the cases, both within the city and countywide, later today. I want to encourage people to get tested. We have, of course, the Syracuse Community Health Center, which is open every day. And we also have been working with the county to move testing sites throughout the city. Today, they are over at the PSLA at Fowler parking lot. And so folks can go over there. And next week, we will be at Grant Middle School on the north side on Tuesday. So we encourage people to get tested. Also related to COVID, we are working with the state through our reopening process. We are in phase 2. At last check, we have 281 city businesses that have affirmed that they are able to meet state criteria to reopen. And we are going to continue to work with our state and local partners to make sure that businesses, when they are able to open, can do it safely. Going back to crime for a moment, we've been updating everyone each week on our crime numbers. As a reminder, our CompStat reports are available on the SyracusePolice.org website. We talked about a violent evening last night. We have seen Part 1 violent crime. Overall, it is still minus 7%. So year to year, we have seen a decrease, but last year we were at minus 12% last week we're at minus 12%. This week we're at minus 7%. So, obviously the recent incidents of violence have impacted those numbers, but still an overall decline. Violent crime. Also, overall decline of property crime of 9%. Last week it was 5%, so we're seeing a continuing downward trend. And so an overall Part 1 crime total, we are 9% below where we were this time last year. So that's still good news, but again, we know we have challenges and we continue to be focused on those going forward. So you may have noticed we have someone new at the table here, Dr. Stephen Thomas, who many of you have gotten to know through the pandemic from SUNY Upstate Medical University. Dr. Thomas is the chief of the Infectious Disease Division at SUNY Upstate Medical University. And given all of the things going on in the community, we thought it was a really important time to remind all of us that we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and as we are getting out more, how we can make sure that we're doing it safely. I also want to note, it is not lost on me that I myself have been around a lot more people recently, around the protests and otherwise, and because of that, I did go and get a COVID test this morning. So again, I want to make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. I will share the results of that test when I have them, but in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thomas to share some thoughts. Doc.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. So as we've heard, infections continue to occur in central New York. Transmission of the virus appears to be stable, and it occurs to be at a low level, but again, we have new cases every single day. And because of this, what this means is that any gathering of people of any size has the potential to cause uninfected people to become infected. So therefore, I would encourage that when people think about whether they want to be involved in gatherings of people, large or small, that they ask themselves a question about what their personal risk may be. So meaning, how would you tolerate infection? How would you tolerate a COVID disease? And if you do decide to participate in gatherings, there are some basic measures that you can take to lower your risk of infection and to lower the risk of infection to others. The first of those would be to reliably wear a mask. We know from the China experience, and we know from the United States experience, and we know from the experience in our own hospital that universal masking makes a difference. It lowers risk considerably. The second thing would be to frequently wash your hands. And so for people that are going to gather, I would recommend that you try to get a travel-size hand sanitizer, bring it with you, and to wash your hands frequently. The third would be to space yourself from others whenever possible. Ideally, you would be 6 feet or more from others, but do the best that you can. The next is that if you are around people who cannot wear a mask for one reason or another, give them space. Next, I would ask that once the gathering is over, you should pay very particular attention to how you're feeling. And if at any point in time you were to develop any kind of symptoms, you should really seek the advice of a medical provider so that they can make a decision with you whether or not you should be tested. And then finally, you should consider how you can protect the people that you live with in the immediate period after the gathering or after the event that you attend. And the types of things you might want to consider would be self-quarantine or change the frequency with which you clean your house, for example. So in summary, be careful, be consistent in employing these measures that I just mentioned, and stick to the basics. Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Doctor. I'll run through a few more updates, and then we'll open it up for questions. In terms of other operational updates for the City of Syracuse, one of the departments that's been impacted most by COVID is our Parks Department. And so I just wanted to give a quick update on where we are with our parks. So just a reminder that parks buildings, community centers, and senior centers remain closed to the public. People can and are continuing to enjoy our parks outdoors. So we've seen increased usage, and that's something that we welcome as long as people are doing it safely. Unfortunately, I am sad to share today that we are canceling our summer camp programs with transportation this summer. It pains me to share that update, and I want to be clear that it is not for health reasons. It's for financial reasons. It is possible to hold summer camps, summer day camps, per the state's guidance, but financially we're just not in a position to do so, not only because of the negative fiscal impact that COVID has had on the city of Syracuse, but also the impact that it's having on many of our partner organizations. And when we reached out to those organizations and tried to figure out ways to do it, we just couldn't figure it out. And again, today's a sad day for a lot of young kids in the city of Syracuse, and a decision, again, I did not take lightly. We are still going to try to do some virtual programming, both with our own park staff and with a few of our partners. The Everson and the Red House, for example, are going to try to work with us on some virtual programming. But again, we know that's not going to be the same. I also wanted to update everyone that we are going to begin next week accepting and approving permits for small gatherings. Mike, just to confirm, are we doing that next week, or did we start that this week? Next week, okay. So starting next week, we will be accepting permits for small gatherings, so under 10, in our parks. So again, we want people to be able to enjoy our parks safely. And the pool conversation continues. I have asked our Parks Department to provide me with a plan to open at most 3 pools. Again, we have 8. So we've already determined that we can't open all of our pools, and again, that is primarily a financial decision, given the negative impact that we've seen here on our city finances. But as of today, the Parks Department has delivered a plan to me that I will review, and hopefully we'll have an update next week on. I had mentioned earlier this week that I ran into some kids over on the west side recently, and I asked them how they were doing and what I could do to help, and they asked me to open the pools, and my heart just broke because I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that, but we're going to try. So stay tuned for more information on that. On a more positive note, we did see from the state starting yesterday that our restaurants are going to be able to do outdoor dining, which is welcome. With the weather being nice, it's going to be nice to see people sitting outside on our sidewalks at tables, enjoying the city. There are a number of things that we have to do to make sure we can accommodate that outdoor dining, starting with going to the Common Council on Monday, and Councilor Green has agreed to introduce the item as a waiver item to change the permit requirements to make it easier for city restaurants to offer outside service. As you can imagine, we have a process involved in that called our Sidewalk Cafe permit process. And given everything that our restaurants have been through, we want to limit the bureaucracy and the red tape and the cost of going through that process. So the Common Council, I want to thank them for being willing to act quickly on that, and they will have that on their agenda on Monday. We will begin processing Sidewalk Cafe permits, anticipating council approval first thing next week. And restaurants can serve outside in the right-of-way when permits are processed. So, there's different types of outdoor seating. Outdoor seating that's on private property, assuming that that the restaurants have gone through the affirmation process with the state. That's something that they can be doing now. And for anyone that will be serving in the right-of-way, we hope to be able to accommodate that early next week. As we always do, just a quick update on the census. We talk about how important it is that we get every resource available to us from the federal government. In order to do that, because so much of the federal resources is based on population, we need to make sure that everyone is participating in the census. The good news is we are still seeing incremental upward progress in our self-response rate. Bad news is it has slowed, and that's something that we need to continue to focus on. So as of June 3rd, we're at 48.4% self-response rate. That's up from 48. That is in line with our other upstate cities. Buffalo's at 48.6, Rochester's at 46.5, and Albany's at 48.7. So we're all pretty similar. We know we have a number of hard-to-count populations in our communities, and that just means that we have to focus that much more on making sure that everyone is filling out that census. Which leads me to my last point. The time for action in Congress to provide direct federal aid to cities, local municipalities, and state governments is now. Frankly, it was yesterday, and if it happened yesterday, I might not have been announcing today that we weren't holding summer camps. The federal government has stepped up and helped a number of struggling industries, but they have not helped cities like Syracuse. County executive has pointed out that just based on that population number, in Monroe County, just down the thruway, which has a slightly larger population than us, and is over that arbitrary 500,000 threshold of population, received over $120 million in the last CARES Act, and Onondaga County received zero. That makes no sense, and the federal government needs to fix it. Again, I talked about pools. That's just scratching the surface of what's at stake if we do not receive direct federal aid quickly. Again, it's not just if we receive it, but the when is critically important. I've talked previously, we challenged our departments to come up with a contingency plan to reduce our budget by $25 million. Having seen the final draft plan, it's not pretty. There is no way to do it without impacting services, without impacting staffing. And I just need everyone to remember, especially our federal representatives, this impacts the very same essential workers that we have all been talking about and all celebrating over the past few months. It is Chief Buckner's officers that are on the front lines protecting us. It is Chief Mon's firefighters that, again, are on the front lines protecting us. It is our sanitation workers that are cleaning up after us every day, picking up garbage, keeping our city clean and safe. That's what's at stake here. And I appreciate the need to support businesses. We absolutely do. I appreciate the need to support healthcare institutions. Absolutely critical. But these essential workers are just as critical. There is no time for a pause. We need action now. With that, I'll open it up to questions. I know we have a lot to talk about.
Well, the first thing that the communications that I've had with the officers, both directly and in passing with them, and then also in broad communications, the first thing is thank you. If you look at some of the events that have occurred across the nation in our country, I'm very proud of how the Syracuse Police Department has responded. And the key things that I've talked to them about is that, the community is a partner. People certainly have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights, and it's our duty to protect them. When we do respond, we want to respond in a very measured way, and for them to continue to be professional as they have been and doing a great job in some very, very long days under some very tough circumstances.
Hey, Dr., we can talk about, we have all to talk about some of the things that are out there in the public dialogue. Yes, the bystanding officer intervening if they see a use of force on another officer that breaks guidelines. How do those things go from a policy, which can happen in this room, to on the ground? What's training? What kind of pep talk? You review an incident like in Minnesota so that your officers are sort of reminded about that. Can you talk about how the policy ends up on the street?
Well, if I'll just unpack your question backwards when you talk about when we're at ground zero for that policy. The first thing we want to have is that the officer clearly understand what's expected of him or her in that moment. That's what the training is for. Our agency has significant training that we do. There's about a nearly 30-week academy that we put our recruits through, which far exceeds what the state requires of us. We're also a state-accredited organization, so we're doing all of the things that by state standards that we're required to do. The other part of that is that we must have accountability measures in place, that when we misstep, that we review that thoroughly, that we document the information, and then I make the appropriate decisions about the officer's behavior. So all of those things in working together, as well as continuing to scan the universe for those hot stove methods of learning. And if you don't know what that means, it's kind of a southern term of when we were kids and you were playing around the stove that our parents warned all of us to stay away from. The first cousin to bump into that, we all would take a step backwards once we saw that. So when we saw what has taken place in Minneapolis, we immediately began to scan our policies on use of force, our policies on how we engage the public, what tactics we use to physically restrain individuals, to make sure that our people understand what's expected of them and that we're not making similar mistakes.
Chief Chapter, the use of force policy that you have designed is relatively new here. They're speaking to protesters. They do say that they want to see a change in the police department, specifically the relationships here between police and the community. So what exactly would a reform of that already new policy look like? And what other changes would you make?
I don't understand your question about a reform of our new policy. What do you mean by that?
Would you change it further, or would you change it further?
We subscribe to continuous improvement. So we're always looking at our policies. We've recently partnered with an organization called LexPol, which is in the process of making sure that our policies are reflective of the things that are considered to be 21st century language. The policy means nothing if we don't have something in place to hold individuals accountable to that. That's where our training comes into place. So we continue to look at incidents that happen around the country. We continue to look at what other professional organizations that are doing, that are working for them, and then also continue to have our local inside folks to make sure that we're training our people on the appropriate things as it relates to use of force, that we have the relationships with the community before the storm, which is why it's important that I think that you're seeing some of that play out in our city. Had we not had strong pre-existing relationships, I think that you would have saw a significant difference in how the community and the public have engaged each other in Syracuse. There have been times when there certainly has been tense moments, and there certainly are some historical scars in our community that have been caused by the police department. But there's no question in my mind at 18 months of myself being in here that the relationships that we have are helping us today. Because what you have not seen or what you have not reported on, at least what I've seen, is I can't tell you the countless number of times that people within the crowd have calmed down the agitators. People within the crowd have asked people not to do that or to destroy something. Clifford Ryan, who is my view is very limited. So Clifford Ryan, who is very, very well known in our community, it was in the center of what was going on at the climax of the moment. Everyone remembers the glass being broken. I remember seeing Clifford pull people away from that to tell them not to do that. So that tells me we are connected in some aspects with our community, but we certainly always recognize that we have opportunity for improvement, and that's an ongoing situation for us.
Mayor, is there anything you'd like to see change right now, given the moment we're in? You mentioned we have a lot of the reforms and you're always looking at it. But right now, given what's been in the news for the past 2 weeks, is there anything you'd really like to see addressed, changed, reformed?
Yeah, so we, again, I'm very pleased that with our use of force policy, that we were ahead of the curve there, but there's a lot of focus on that right now. There's a lot of information. There's an initiative called 8 That Can't Wait that we are aligning with our policy to see how we stack up. We think we stack up favorably. We don't think we hit it exactly the way that it's being called for. But one of the areas that I know that we're looking at more is I believe, Chief, we call it the continuation of
Force continuum.
Force continuum. So we're looking at that. So I want to continue to look at all of our policies. Again, that's where that Lexapol tool comes in. And I also would like to get some clarity around our disciplinary process. That again, we have taken action to change, but that's currently in court.
Did you, Mayor, have a chance to review the video from Buffalo about the 75-year-old man being shoved and being seriously injured? And if you have, that attracted pretty swift response and content. I wonder what difference you see between that and the article.
Yeah. Chief, you want to start?
I have had an opportunity to review that video. I will tell you that any attempts to compare the two, I think, are unfair to all parties involved for the Syracuse incident specifically. The incident in Buffalo occurred with what appeared to be a non-urgent kind of situation. The officers were walking towards something. I don't know what they were walking towards, but it did not appear to be an urgent moment based upon what I'm seeing from their behavior. In contrast to that, the incident in Syracuse occurred at the climax of the night. It was the time when the crowd had turned in a very negative way, and it began a physical assault onto the courthouse next door, and then also the public safety building. Next, the gentleman in Buffalo was hospitalized and appeared to be bleeding from his ears. Mr. Nett suffered scratches and scrapes, and damage to his equipment. Next, the video in Buffalo appears to show pre, during, and post what was going on in that moment. So we have a larger window of footage that we're able to review. In contrast to that, in Syracuse, we were given a 3-second video. I inquired as to could we get a complete or unedited version of that video. I was told that that's all the gentleman had, other than some still shots that were taking, I believe, before that moment happened. So I think that there are clear distinctions between Buffalo and Syracuse, but the one thing that was similar is that the mayor and I immediately ordered an investigation into the incident, and that we had both condemned what happened on that evening. That was certainly not our intent, and when I say condemn, to knock Mr. Nett down, because Mr. Nett, just like police did, Mr. Nett had a legal right to be where he was. I just wish it was not in the path of what we were doing.
Your investigation is ongoing.
Yes, sir.
In the interim, what's the status of the officer?
The officer is still at work. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the chief covered it. I think it's dangerous to compare the two as apples to apples, but we're focused on what's happening here in Syracuse, and we're taking this issue very seriously.
I understand it's under investigation, but are there any plans to directly address the demands implemented by the Syracuse Press Club?
Can you, what specific demands?
A statement on Facebook. I spoke to your team yesterday.
Okay.
They said that you wouldn't be addressing it right now.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
I've seen a lot recently.
aware of the
So
demands.
you're asking specifically about demands that were laid out by the Syracuse Press Club. So I will make sure that that we review those and get you a formal response.
Obviously, tomorrow's going to be large, expect thousands of people. Tell me about those concerns that you have and how you guys are prepping for tomorrow's protest.
Well, I have concerns given the size that's expected from the crowd. We expect a couple, maybe a few thousand people that will participate. Given our recent history, I will suspect that the vast majority of that crowd will be law-abiding people exercising their First Amendment rights. We also expect for the majority of the day to be without incident. If we have problems, thus far they've occurred when nightfall has come. With our partners, including the community, we feel like that we are prepared to deal with anything that may come up as a result of that.
And with last night's shootings, was there any correlation with last night's protests and the shootings that took place last night on site?
I have no information that any of our violence as it relates to shootings has anything to do with the protests.
Were they related to each other at all? Do you know?
That is still under investigation, and we're still trying to connect those dots to see exactly what actions as a result of then the two individuals being arrested today and how they're connected with some of our recent events.
Mayor Walsh, when you got in touch, I know that you said about 18 businesses you had counted up were looted and obviously were vandalized, damaged. Have you, your team reached out to any of those or reached out to businesses in general downtown just ahead of, really expecting anything?
Yeah, so our Department of Neighborhood and Business Development team immediately started reaching out to businesses in the downtown district starting last Sunday after the unrest the evening before. We've been doing that in partnership with the Downtown Committee of Syracuse. And going into this weekend, we've certainly received questions and concerns from business owners about what we're expecting, what they should be doing to prepare. But again, I think, you know, when we look at what's transpired since Saturday night, what we've seen is peaceful, safe protests, and as long as it's the same individuals that have been involved up to this point that are involved tomorrow, we expect the same outcome. You have to. We are, as we always have to do, preparing for the worst, but I truly am expecting the best. I expect to have a peaceful evening, but we'll be ready if that doesn't happen.
What's the significance of your extending the emergency order today, and are you anticipating voting?
So we extended our emergency order. The county executive's better at this whole emergency order thing. He's got more practice than I do. And so when we both issued our orders relative to the unrest last weekend, I issued mine for 5 days. He issued his for 30. So that expired today. I issued a subsequent order for 30 days, not because I want to have or expect to have a special emergency for that period of time, but it does give us options going into tomorrow. It is my goal not to establish a curfew tomorrow. That was something that I didn't take lightly, but we felt was necessary given what was happening on the ground. By extending the emergency order, that gives us the ability, it keeps that curfew tool in our toolbox. And the moment Chief Buckner tells me to take it out, I'll take it out, but not a moment before, because again, I do not take lightly taking people's liberties away. But it is, we need to, again, make sure we're fully prepared for worst case outcomes, but I don't expect them.
It seems that you're going to be out in force tomorrow, Chief Buckner. Can you give an estimate of how many officers, whether, that includes the town and village departments, potential state police, do you have any sort of ballpark number of how much officers will be out?
I don't have an exact number for you. Obviously, as I stated earlier, it'll be all hands on deck for Syracuse Police Department, and we will have those officers kind of on an A and B schedule, being to cover the 24 hours. And then we have all of our state, county, towns and villages, and then the other agencies that I mentioned that will be a part of that. Currently, there are 400 plus or so members of SPD, and then with the addition of our external partners. And then we want to count the 2,000 or 3,000 citizens that will be there as a part of our contingency, because part of the security plans includes them hopefully working with us to ensure that they have a safe event.
And is there anybody from outside of, from other communities that are, in Rochester or from another place that's not the state police or, not our county?
No, ma'am. It's just been within the central New York immediate footprint here that we have that will be a part of that.
Yeah, well, you plan on attending tomorrow's protest?
So I'm very careful about how and when I engage with the protests. I learned this from the deputy mayor. When offered or invited to participate in a protest, I welcome the opportunity to participate in a way that is productive and supportive. I don't ever want to take attention away from the important cause that they're protesting. So again, as we've developed relationships with those that are out protesting, we keep that line of communication open. That's what we did yesterday, and that's what led me to march yesterday. So I'm certainly going to be around and available to engage with people. We also are doing some other public engagements starting at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. We're going to be at the Dunbar Center and Northeast Community Center giving away masks and hand sanitizer. So I will be participating in those, and then again being present in and around the city and available to engage as appropriate.
No, I might direct this question to Chief Buckner, but any concerns under that tomorrow?
Again, I think we're as well prepared as we can be, and again, we have no indication that things will go badly, but you need to be prepared for it. So, other than the unknown, I think we've covered all of our bases. Do last question.
The same number of officers that we have that were assigned the body cams. We don't have additional body cams that we've been provided since this incident. I will tell you that we've had internal discussions of the need to make that a sense of urgency to outfitting our entire police department, specifically, I meaning primarily our uniform division with the body cam and some of the other units. I believe it's in excess of 100 or so that we have that are deployed.
Yeah, and I would just say again, that's been a priority to outfit 100% of uniform officers with body cameras. We've benefited from outside funding to fund that program, but with funding comes bureaucracy, and so that funding hasn't come as quickly as we would have liked. But we, again, I think recent events have heightened the urgency, and we already felt urgent that we need to get those cameras out onto there.
The CompStat numbers showed 8 homicides to date. Is that
That does not reflect
Last
last evening's. We're at 9. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a safe weekend.